Hey there, Surrogate Gamers, it's your boy Stan the Man coming straight from the SurrogateTV HQ. And today we're going to show you how to set up an RC car with Surrogate.tv. So the last couple of months we've had a lot of experimentation with the Robot Explorer RC cars, and we think we got the perfect formula. For outdoor use, we would recommend using an RC car that is like a 4x4 Jeep or something as such, with 1/16 scale being perfect since it can go over different terrain, etc. As for the camera, we recommend using a GoPro since it stabilizes the image quite nicely and has really good colors. However, if you want to do a more simple setup, we're going to show you in this video. You don't need a GoPro, all you need is a webcam or a Raspberry cam and 20 minutes of your time, just as usual. So let's go and see what's inside of the car. Keep in mind that for this setup, you will need an RC car that has a separate ESC and a radio frequency controller. The reason is that we use the pin cables from the radio frequency controller and the ESC to communicate with our Raspberry Pi. You will also need to pre-configure your Raspberry Pi with the Surro SDK, and if you still haven't, make sure to check out our YouTube video on that. For this setup, you'll need a breadboard, 6 male-to-male connectors, 3 pin cables that are male to female, 1 pin cable that is male to male, a Raspberry Pi 4, an SD card to power your Raspberry Pi, a power bank that powers the power of the Raspberry Pi, and a camera. If you want to go one step further, you can modify your RC car setup with these. For example, you can use a GoPro instead of a webcam for better quality, and then you use a micro HDMI to HDMI cable to connect it to a capture card, which you can plug into your Raspberry Pi. You can also use a 4G hotspot to be able to drive the RC car outside on the streets. You just plug it in and then it uses it for the internet. And if you don't want to use the breadboard and you know how to solder, technically what you can do is make your own little PCB board with all the connectors. But let's begin setting up our RC car with Surrogate.tv. So inside, what you'll find is the ESC and a radio frequency receiver. We already unscrewed all this stuff, but in the essence, what we need to do is remove the cables, the pin cables from the radio frequency receiver, since we will need them to connect to our Raspberry Pi. So I'm removing it from this casing, and you can basically forget about this radio frequency gadget. So in order for us to hook up the RC car with our Raspberry Pi, we will need to connect the pin cables from the RC car through a breadboard. The reason is we only have to connect certain cables to the Raspberry Pi, and some of them actually have to connect to each other. So we'll use a breadboard to make the correct connections as we want. So first things first, we are going to take 3 male-to-male pin connectors, 2 of these, and we're going to connect them in an interesting parallel. The only parallel we have here are these 2, so 1 and 1 pin. The reason is we need to unify the ground. So now what I'm going to do is grab our cables from the RC car, and as you can see, traditionally the ground cable is the black one. So this is in any electronics, you could say. So what I'm gonna do is flip them up so the black goes together, and now I'm connecting 1 pin cable inside and then the other pin cable inside, in order for us to make sure that the ground is now connected. Next up, what I have to do is to connect the red cable from the ESC to the servo controller. So as you can see, it's the red cable, and for our setup we use the red cable also for the breadboard. So I'm taking the connector of the red, so let's actually show it from this side. So this is this one, and now I'm gonna connect it here to make sure that the red cables are now connected. So we have red and red running in parallel, and they're connected to the ESC. Alright, so now all of the ESC and the RC car cables are connected to the breadboard, and now we gotta connect our Raspberry Pi to the RC car as well. We will do it the same way through the breadboard, so we just gotta make sure that the correct cables are connected in the right pins. So first things first, we gotta connect the common ground. So we had a black cable, which is ground, so I'm gonna take, for this case, let's make it the gray one. It's kind of similar, close enough color. And I'm gonna plug it in to the same parallel, so it's also now connected to the black cables. Next up, we need to connect to the white cables of the RC car. The reason is they are data channel cables. So one of them is responsible for the motor to go forward and back, and the other one is responsible for going left and right. So I'm gonna take these two cables in the blue and the purple, and I'm going to connect them in parallel with the white ones from our other two connectors. And let's see, we're gonna connect the white one in parallel and the other white one in parallel. There we go. And now, as you can see, all of them are connected. And now we're going to connect the pin cables, the other side of them, to the Raspberry Pi. So first thing, we're gonna start with the ground cable, which is the gray, and we are going to connect it to the fourth pin, so 1, 2, 3, 4, coming on the right side of the Ethernet jack. So this is the common ground. And now we have these two, the data channel cables, and we are going to put it on the side of the ground cables. So there we go. One thing to keep in mind, what might happen in this setup is that the purple and the blue, so the data channel cables, are connected in the reverse. So in the settings it will say that it's the motor going forward and back, but it will actually steer. If that is the case, all you have to do is flip them. So just flip the two data channel cables in reverse and you're good to go. As said, if you want a more robust setup, don't use a breadboard, but actually make your own little PCB for all the connectors. It will be a bit more sturdy. But if you're doing it for the first time or you don't know how to solder just like me, just use a breadboard as it's an easier setup for the first time. Alright, so now that we have all the wiring between the Raspberry Pi and the RC card done, we can start booting it up. So first we're gonna connect the USB camera to the Raspberry Pi, and now we are gonna power it up, assuming that you already pre-installed your SDK on the Raspberry Pi. If you haven't, go to YouTube video and do that first. And now I'm gonna just plug it in, the power. The power is now plugged into the Raspberry Pi, and now it is booting. So it's gonna take a minute or so, and then we will start setting it up on our dashboard. Alright, so our Raspberry Pi is booted, so now what we're gonna do is go to the dashboard of our game and start setting up the Raspi. So as we can see here on the RC card game I created, I now have one of our Raspberry Pi showing up, so I'm gonna go to the settings page of the Raspberry Pi. Gonna continue, and here I'm going to set RC car as the game template. And since I'm using a USB camera for this setup, I'm gonna set the camera to USB. I already predefined the Wi-Fi, so there's nothing I have to do there. And now I'm just gonna press continue. And it says that my controller is now connected correctly. But for me to make sure that that is the case, what I'm gonna do is now turn on the RC card. So let's see, I'm gonna turn it on, and let's actually zoom in here. So when you turn it on, at least on the Traxxas, let's turn it off quickly for a second. So on the Traxxas cars, when you turn it on and the connection is established correctly, the LED will not blink but actually show as a single color. It means that we are simulating the radio frequency receiver and everything is working well. Alright, so now that we've set up the game type, we are going to go back to the dashboard. As we can see, the controller and streamer are both showing green, which means everything is good. Let's preview the camera to see that the camera is working. And there we go, I'm moving the USB camera and we can see Alexi recording us, which is another inception moment we have in this YouTube video. And now I'm gonna stop the preview, and there's one more thing we have to do, and that is enable the controls. So we gotta go to the settings page, we gotta go to in-game configuration. So in the in-game configuration, we gotta bind the keys. So for going backwards, we're gonna press S. For going forward, we're gonna press W. For steering left, we're gonna press A. For steering right, we are gonna press D. There's also other things you can add, like for example, increase the turn or the shifting, and you can also increase the power of your motor. But for this setup, we don't really need that. So now I'm gonna save, and we see no errors, which means that the setup went correctly. So now what we can do is preview, and specifically, because I'm not sure if I'm gonna go forward or I'm gonna turn, let's see, I'm gonna press A, and I'm going forward. So we gotta swap those pin cables, as I mentioned previously. This is a good way to test. So now we're just gonna remove the pin cable 2. We're just gonna swap them in reverse. There we go. And now let's see, if I go forward, backward, everything seems to be working. So we have the whole RC car setup ready. We can go back and forth, we can steer. All we have to do is pack all of this hardware into the RC car and we are ready to go. In our setup, since we're driving outside on the streets, we usually use a waterproof box, but if you're driving just inside of your room, you don't really need that. You just put everything together, close it up, put the camera up, and you're good to go. All right, now that we got our RC car set up, we are able to go forward, turn, we can do whatever we want. We are gonna stop the preview on our game page, and now we're gonna turn the game online. And now anybody can connect to this car over the internet and drive it in your house or wherever you set it up. Like and share this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you next week with another awesome SurrogateTV video.